Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the launch tonight of Paradise by, and I have to do this very carefully because last night I completely mangled the various names which go into this, which are Greg, Lisa, Frida, and Lazarus. Greg Lazarus. Okay, those of you confused, Greg Lazarus are sitting. Greg Lazarus is Greg Lazarus are sitting on the stage on my immediate right. I unfortunately have not had a chance to read Paradise yet. It only arrived 2 days ago, but I think it's got a lovely cover. The other things I can say about it are I know two people who have read it, people kind of on the inside, whose opinions I respect very highly, and who have both spoken very, very positively about it. One of them is on stage tonight as well with Greg Lazarus. That's a good thing because I know that you like the book. The other thing I can say is that I did read, as I'm sure most of you here did, when in broad daylight I opened my eyes, their first fictional collaboration in fiction, which I thought was absolutely superb, and I have been waiting for number 2 since then. I believe that Paradise is entirely different to their first book, but when a married couple can get together and pull off writing a novel together the way they did with the first one, and a couple of years later they are still married, I think it definitely makes the second one worth reading. So I don't know how the hell they do it. I don't know how any married couple can actually write a book together. I'm in a very happy marriage and I love my wife, but we keep some things separate, and I think that I thought that was one of the reasons why we have a happy marriage, but I don't know. So those of you who see these two as role models for you, for yourselves and for your own relationships, you do that at your own risk. Okay, there's no way that, yeah. Seriously though, they have proved that they write extremely well together, and as I said, I am really, really looking forward to reading this. In conversation with Greg and Lisa tonight is Henrietta Rose-Innes, who is a wonderful writer in her own right. She is the author of a number of novels, most recently the dark and beautiful and haunting Nineveh, and of course a fantastic collection of short stories called Homing. So please welcome Henrietta Rose-Innes, who is one person, and the other two. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mervyn. Thanks everybody for coming out. For me, it's an absolute delight to be on stage again with these two. A couple of years ago now, we did much the same for their first book, and I'm very pleased to say that I've had a fair bit of involvement with both of these books, and it's been just an absolute privilege to work with these two writers. I actually want to hark back to that first novel. I'm sure many of you here read When in Broad Daylight. Wibdioni, as we like to call it for short. And one of the things that struck me about the new book, which, as Mervyn said, has a lovely cover, is how very different in tone it is to that first book. When in Broad Daylight Opened My Eyes was a stunningly suspenseful psychological thriller that explored some real darkness in the human soul. It had a dark edge to it, that book. And in this book, somehow things seem to have lightened up. It's partly a bit of a knockabout comedy. It's partly a heist. It deals with, I'm trying not to give too much away because it's got a very twisty plot. It partly deals with a plan by international organized criminals to come to Cape Town and steal a precious artifact. But the twisty plot never really overwhelms the human warmth at the heart of the book, which is about the main protagonists, who are these flawed, warm, immensely sympathetic characters. So I guess my first question is really about that shift in tone. Why so sunny for this book?
Well, the kids are a bit older now. You feel better. After the first book, people would say to us, you have such a warped sensibility. You're so cynical. Just living in the world must be such a nightmare for you. You just got to say, well, that was sort of the mood we were in while we were writing the book. And we do have different moods. We wanted something warmer and more human. I mean, it's not a kind of really knockabout comedy. There's funny bits, we hope, but we wanted something that speaks to the heart a bit more. A lot of books, particularly nowadays, a lot of them seem to be quite dark and disturbing, and that's great. But kind of life is so hard that it's sometimes nice to have something to cheer you and give you a bit of hope.
Yeah, and I suppose, like Greg said, with the is this working? Yeah, okay. Like Greg said, with the first book, we got quite a bit of feedback from people that they were a bit disturbed that the world kind of didn't reward goodness and punish badness. And and the world is like that. I mean, the world doesn't reward goodness and punish badness, unfortunately. So we thought we would try something different and create characters that we hope people will like and people will connect with, and see how people respond to that.
Yeah, sure. No, I didn't mean to suggest it was only a knockabout comedy. It certainly has quite complex elements which I'd like to explore in more detail shortly. I mean, there are philosophical depths to the book as well, but there certainly is that lightness of touch, that comedic element, which is just so enjoyable to read. But it's certainly not unambiguous, and I think, I'm not sure who said this about the book, but it's a wonderful line. Somebody said it's an uplifting book about failure, which I think is just exactly right. Maybe it was one of you, because each of the characters are in their own way, and I'd really like you to talk about each of the characters because they are such well realized human personalities. Each of them is, in their own way, a failure in their own eyes, and has reached a point in their life where they're kind of stuck, and somehow they manage to forge a kind of a triumph out of that in the end. But maybe you could talk us through a little bit the three main characters and where they are in their lives when we meet them.
Thanks.
It's four characters.
There was I guess we were intrigued by this kind of feeling that you can have kind of as you enter into middle age, this kind of beset by this feeling of failure. I mean, when I say you, I mean like I. And it's sometimes not a failure. I mean, you can of course list your particular failures, and that can take some time. But it's more than that. It's more just a sense of not having done it, not having gotten there, and sometimes you're not even sure what getting there is. But we wanted to just explore the sense of not being up to the mark in a way that had a kind of lightness about it. So one of our characters, Herschel Bloch, an overweight, middle-aged real estate assistant in Cape Town, is somebody who we feel for because Herschel he's kind of, at least at the beginning of the story, not quite getting there.
No, and what Herschel tries to do is talk himself into a better position. You know, like we're all told that if you talk to yourself, if you kind of like motivate yourself, if you kind of say the right things at the right time, things will be better. But I mean, it doesn't, you know. So Herschel, when things go badly for him, he engages with self-talk. He says, okay, he's going to go out and he's going to make a change and things are going to be better. And it doesn't quite always work out like that for him. So that sort of appealed to us.
But
I mean, would you say he's a loser in some ways?
You're looking at me very closely.
I'm trying to get my finger on it. I mean, that feels a bit
He
harsh.
feels a bit like that. I mean, and there are other characters who kind of dance around this sense. So we have Sarita, a young woman who is an aspiring judo champion, and she fights. She fights for what she thinks is important, and yet she still feels she's not quite there. Something needs to change. Something more must happen.
One of her slogans is tough interior, tough exterior. And that's what she kind of uses to get herself through. But once left with the feeling that something's still not quite working for her.
At least at the beginning.
Well,
yeah.
Well, we don't want to give spoilers away.
Yeah.
But I just want to get back to this idea of losers because, you know, I mean, a lot of the time one's kind of told, the world is kind of divided into winners and losers. And it seems such a kind of brash and crazy way to sort of look at things. And we wanted to explore the notion because, I mean, basically, at the end of the day, everybody's really a loser. I mean, life is, you can't really win at life. There is no winning play, really. And so, we wanted to look at that a bit more.
There's also well, the action is set mostly in contemporary Cape Town, but also in 18th century Cape Town. And in both situations, there is a Dutch person who comes to visit. So these are two more characters who are quite bold and who want to do particular things. I mean, South Africa has a long history of Dutch. Well, the Cape has a long, exciting history of Dutch visitors wreaking havoc on us. So we wanted to introduce that part.
So let's talk a little bit about the 18th century section. I mean, this is one of the ambitious aspects of the book. I mean, you have this contemporary story revolving around contemporary people's lives, and then every now and then you dip back into the past, which is revealed through a series of letters from an 18th century Dutch man who came to visit. Could you talk a little bit about that decision to do that, to bring these chunks of the past into a contemporary book? And maybe also it might be interesting to chat a bit about what kind of depths of research you went to, and how you thought about presenting that antiquated voice in the book.
Depths of research.
You
want to speak about where you got Menno from?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. This is a character who actually emerged from something some years ago. I dropped out of a creative writing course that I was taking, and I was left with a sort of tatty piece of manuscript, which Lisa and I have been pillaging ever since. And one of the characters in this manuscript, this figure, this late 1700s figure called Menno, was somebody who intrigued us, and we wanted more from him. So we developed him as one strand of this book. And he works as a kind of counterpoint to the contemporary Dutch figure and to various other events in the novel. How did we do the 18th century writing? It's a tricky and interesting process because I read quite a lot of 18th century letters from visitors to the Cape, and I mean they were often intriguing and fascinating, and yet at the same time maybe a little bit boring in the sense that they're quite slow paced. So we thought that writing a letter in the exact style of the 18th century wouldn't work for us. We wanted our character to be a kind of brash, lively young fellow, and his style reflects that.
Because I mean, it is something I've noticed recently. I don't know, Lisa, maybe you want to say something about this. That there have been a couple of books in recent years which have tried to pull off this trick of transposing basically antique Dutch into modern English dialogue, which is a sort of an impossible task. But people have chosen different ways of doing it. Like I think Andre Brinkenfillede chose a particular way of writing antiquated Dutch in English. I think in the recent book Spiral House, that author too has experimented with trying ways of representing an old style of speech. Did you consider doing something like that at any point? Or?
Not really, no. We wanted the book to be entertaining and a kind of light, affirming sort of read. So we didn't want the language to be too complicated. So we modernized it really, but we still wanted to get some kind of 18th century feel coming through, which we hope we succeeded in doing.
There are a lot of ways of doing this. There's probably no right way of rendering 18th century Dutch letters, but you have to think about what you want to do with it. So, if the book had been about the massacre of the San in the Northern Cape in the 18th century, it would have been a different vibe and a different feeling. Yeah.
Because that would have been heavier?
Yeah, it wouldn't have, the light feel wouldn't have been able to take the weight of the theme.
No, I mean, I say that because you do indeed touch on some pretty heavy themes as well, and it's actually extremely interesting how you choose to handle those. I mean, I don't think you can write about 18th century in the Cape without touching on some pretty chilling subjects, including slavery, of course, which is a kind of a background theme to the book. Maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about that, because you do touch on elements of oppression, of bondage, in several different ways, but with quite a light touch, and that's an interesting choice when you're talking about such a weighty issue.
Yeah, I suppose we wanted to use humour. I think you can still use humour to make a serious point. I don't think if the topic is very serious that you necessarily can't do it in a kind of humorous way. And with the slavery and the oppression, we didn't want it to be too kind of deep and dark. And in both cases, the characters that are drawn into the kind of slavery and the other aspect of bondage or oppression, which I don't want to go into detail about now because it will kind of spoil the book a little bit. Both characters are kind of drawn in against their will, and they're not drawn in predominantly to fight slavery or the other kind of issue. They're drawn in for other reasons. They're drawn in for reasons of wanting to impress other characters that they're interested in.
They want to impress girls.
Yeah, really. That's we preferred a more circuitous route to get to where we wanted to go.
But also that's effective because those background issues resonate in your characters' lives, where they are all in some form of, they're imprisoned in some way in their own lives. Do you think that's fair enough to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things the book is about is, of course, failure and trying to make your way out of it, and a process of self-discovery, and the other is about bondage and oppression and
stuckness, a feeling of stuckness or paralysis.
Yeah.
You're not paralysis, stuckness and paralysis, that you're in a situation that you can't get out of.
And a struggle for freedom from that. Yeah. So it's a kind of glancing, coquettish look at slavery and other kinds of oppression.
When we were talking about this earlier, you used the phrase grotesque jocularity, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, we weren't talking about ourselves. It was